Fantastic. This is the presentation titled Getting There's Half the Fun, My UW Processes and Practices. Fascinating stuff. So what's this presentation? This is processes and practices, how we do it in a pretty long-established, relatively sophisticated, decently ambitious uPortal implementation at the University of Wisconsin. Other resources you might be interested in. Last year, there was a presentation on, I think it's fair to call it Jenkins-driven Maven, that was in this same thread. And that's last year's presentation. The slides are up. It was recorded. It's linked from the lanyard entry for this presentation. Highly recommend you take a look at that. There was this year's presentation in the My UW redesign, which was earlier this morning. If you missed that, I understand it's recorded as well. There's going to be a tech demo this evening. It's this evening, right? Of the My UW, the My UW redesign. It's been showed off there. And I have this bad habit of producing blog posts once in a while, and it seems this is naturally make one so that all the hyperlinks will be clickable. Because otherwise, you get the slides and you try to click on them. Getting there is not, in fact, half the fun. Though I am grateful to my 18-month-old son for making it not nearly as miserable as it could have been, but not, in fact, half the fun. Being here is more fun than was getting here. Themes. This is what you need to know that will allow you to leave and go to a different presentation. So what we're going to talk about is the virtue in automating everything. Processes are good. You should have one. And your automation and your process probably aren't perfect, so you get opportunities to inspect and adapt. And if you've now learned everything you're going to learn in this stuff. Licensing should be clear, so it is speaking only for me, not for anybody who could get me in trouble. All right, so I need to provide a little bit of context of what we're talking about. What are these processes and practices for? Why are we doing this? And/or excuse to show some nice screenshots. So we have really a very lovely portal, I think, at the University of Wisconsin, and it's got lots of lovely stuff in it. Students can see a course schedule. If this looks familiar because you think it's an Apereo portlet, that's because it is. There's personal information that you can see in the portal, so you can at least see what the university thinks your name is. So if it's wrong, maybe you want to raise that issue. You can even kind of self-service set some things through the portal. Go after updating your address or updating your preferred name, what you'd like to be addressed as. My favorite portlet is payroll information. You can go in and get access to your payroll information, figure out where all your deductions went. And so the theme is service delivery. The university needs to deliver some services. They should have a decent UI. They should be available. Maybe we deliver them through the portal, and that turns out to be a pretty nice strategy for delivering services. So we're delivering some nice services through the portal. And in a year, you got to get your W-2, and you can get that through the portal, so that's pretty cool. You can check out your leave balances, so you can plan your vacation or figure out how sick you might be. You can check on your benefits and make sure that the university and you have kind of the same vision on how that's going to work. I'm very grateful for benefits, including for my wife and child, and it's also reassuring to be able to click in there every once in a while and make sure that they still get benefits. Still do, I checked. Access to other stuff like help desk cases. Once upon a time, my MacBook Air totally went berserk. I hope it doesn't do that during this presentation. But if it did, I could raise a help desk case, and then I'd have access to that through the portal, so that's pretty convenient. Maybe I'd like to use Blackboard Collaborate, so I'd like to spin up a web conferencing session, and I could go use their UI for that. Maybe that would work. Or I could use more of a designed UI for our needs to do that right through the portal, and that would probably work. There's quick links across the top. These turn out to be much more popular than I appreciate. More on that later, but very convenient. You log into Portal, and this can be kind of your launching point to go get to Student Center, Faculty Center, or your Whisk mail, or whatever it was that you thought was important. We do have a bookmarks portlet in our portal, so there's that. And of course the weather, because why not? Besides serving the University of Wisconsin-Madison, we serve the whole system, because it's a pretty nice thing to be able to get your pay stub and see your benefits and that kind of stuff. And it's kind of a system-wide problem, confronting a system-wide solution, so that's cool. So besides logging into UW Madison portal, you can also log in a system way to get to a portal localized to the part of the system that your identity comes from. And much fewer features. We're not serving a bunch of student stuff for UW Eau Claire, say, but at least those employees can get pay stubs and benefits, and it's one less thing to figure out how to implement elsewhere. So that's cool. And then there's a public view on the portal, because the portal turns out to be the mechanism to deliver a course guide. So you're looking at what courses might I want to enroll in as I plan out my education at the university. And so that's an application that's delivered through the portal. How am I doing, Jay? So the point of all that, why did you need that context? The point is it's relatively mature and sophisticated. We have had 8 years to incur technical debt and or build cool things and put them in our portal. And in the course of that, there's lots of cool stuff in the portal. Also afoot is a redesign, because once you have all that stuff in your portal, it would be good to kind of revisit the experience of that and make it much more usable. So that's cool. And there's this redesign afoot with goals like that to make it more personalized, make it responsive, built on uPortal 4.1 and Responder, and maybe get quite a bit more agile about continuously improving Portal with exciting stuff that you really need, and or get your notifications to you there. That sounds good too. This presentation is not about the redesign. There was the one earlier, and we'd love to talk and demo about that later in the tech demo. But context. We have a big, complicated portal, and we have ambitions to make it just as big and just as wonderful, but feel less complicated through a redesign. So there's a lot of work to do to accomplish that. How are we doing on context? People feel like maybe they know what the goal is, what My UW is, why we would need to have processes and practices. That sounds good. Let's talk about one kind of process and practice that I think is working well for us. So GitHub is a thing. It's a place to put your source code. It's a pretty good place. It's hosted Git. And I'm very grateful that our uPortal implementation, much of that source code is in fact in GitHub, which means that we can do Git branching, and we can propose changes via pull requests. So here's a few recent pull requests of features that came into our portal. Pull requests are wonderful things where you can write a little markdown, drop in a few screenshots, kind of describe what it is that you changed. That's cool. And you can see what commits are in a pull request. So a pull request exists in kind of a bigger abstraction than individual commits, right? You can have your individual clean little atomic commits. That's cool. You can package them up into a bigger story to accomplish something. And that happens maybe on a feature branch that turns into a pull request when you propose to your team, because you're working with a team, that you would like, you think it's ready, it's time for it to come together. And then GitHub gives you a nice UI for taking a look at what changes are in that pull request. So you can certainly pull down that feature branch and try it out locally, and that's a good idea. But even if you don't do that, you can at least through the UI kind of eyeball, does this look good? Is this what we expect this to be? I probably don't have time for the story, but I'll tell it anyway. So we discuss our tasks as a team, and once upon a time we were discussing the feature of in the little search filter box in the marketplace portlet, and it needs to remember what your search filter was when you leave the screen and come back. And I was talking with Tim Verteen about that, and he had the totally fine idea of, I'm going to put that in a session. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm just going to put it in the session. I understand that. It's good. It's a good idea. And he goes off and codes it, and he comes back with the pull request with the change set proposed to merge. And it turns out that portlet sessions are just for us boring old people. And hip programmers, in fact, mean something client-side in HTML5 when they talk about sessions. In fact, the filter was there because it's UI and it's totally reasonable. Anyway, so in the pull request, I at least got to see that change go by and understand that, oh, that was implemented in a different way than I thought it was going to be implemented. Not because it was done wrong, but because I did not, from the conversation, get an understanding that I can get by looking at the diff. So, pull requests, good things. Of course, besides just looking at them and appreciating them and saying, that's a good change, I like that change. You know, when you go to cross the road, your mother probably told you, or someone probably told you, you should look both ways before crossing the road. Implied in that is that you might do something based on the information you get by looking both ways. You don't look both ways and then just step out into the road regardless of what you see. Pull requests are like that, where besides, you know, a pull request allows us to look both ways, and so we can look both ways at what is in this change set, and we can discover that, you know what, that Andrew guy did it wrong. And it would be better if you just go ahead and improve it in a subsequent commit in response to feedback. Say on the 25th, I had a change. Had some discussion about that change. On the 26th, I made the change better. And it was enough better that my colleague Tim Levitt looked at that and said, now it's good enough. You should go in. It's the big green, it's a very attractive green merge button, and merges in the pull request. And in it goes. So, the process and practice that we're using successfully, I think, in My UW there is to use Git, have feature branches, compose the changes into a unit of change that makes some sense, stick it up there as a pull request, get someone else on the team to look at it, say, that looks pretty good, and hit the big green button and merge it. And ideally, the person who merges it is not the person who wrote it, so at least two people have looked at it. That GitHub sure is nice. You get branches and merging, and it's a nice thing. What happens if we don't do that? What happens if somebody comes along and just makes changes, maybe directly to in Subversion, and we don't have all this nice UI, and we're not, how hard can it possibly be? So at the top of our portal, we have these very convenient links to conveniently access some services using the sign-on. And we've got these overlays that I'm about to talk about, but for now, we'll stipulate we've got these different overlays for the different environments. We got one for pre-dev, we got one for test, we got one for QA, we got one for production, and in there's a properties file that defines where those quick links go. And I had the task to go ahead and update the My Web space. It was migrating to a new service to go to Box. Well, I can do that. It's a one-line change, text editor, no problem. Go in, edit it to go to Box, like you see. That was like QA. Worked great on QA. Then I go to apply that change to that properties file for production, and I do that. And we see the problem where, put the value on the wrong line. Set the webmail URL to go to Box. Turns out that webmail URL, that whiskmail link, gets a lot of use. We're not happy about that. And so what's that story about? Well, certainly it's a story about don't be careless, my bad. But it's also a story about processes and practices that with slightly better tooling, one thing that happened there is that that's a separate properties file in each environment, and it's just not so much true that you're like happy Git merging a change across branches, because they're not branches, they're separate files. And so mostly you're just kind of copying the change over. Anytime you manually do anything, you can probably do it wrong. At least I can. That's how that works. And it's also a story of code review, that had that been in Git, had we used a pull request, had we had that process for that, then maybe, just maybe, Tim's routine would have been able to look at that change and say, Andrew, you're a bonehead, you're doing this wrong. Whereas in the process that I used, I didn't give Tim any opportunity to do that, because you just slam that change right into trunk and off you go. Also, just don't be careless. But. Which is then introduction to, I need to recap what we talked about last year. By we, I mean other people, but conceptually the same thread of inquiry. So last year I think it was mostly about Jenkins-driven Maven. So we have source control. We have stuff in GitHub, which is attractive and has a nice mascot. We have stuff in a locally hosted subversion. That's where stuff goes that has things that we'd really like to not get out there. We use this wonderful thing called tcrypt to encrypt all the credentials as they're stored in source control. But as an extra measure of comfort there, beyond that, it's in local subversion instead of being up on GitHub. So you got a couple things there. We got Bitbucket. Bitbucket has the virtue of being free to higher ed. Cheapness has its own quality, I guess. And then I went looking for the logo for CBS. And I think fittingly, that's what I found. So we're really trying to not use CVS so much anymore. There's a little bit of that going on. So we got source control. Source control is good. You should use it. We've got a fork of uPortal. The thing that happens when you go into GitHub and you clone the repo. So there's a uPortal fork that we have, probably just like the one that every one of you has. That's cool. And it's got lots of commits and lots of feature branches, and we've got the UW master branch. So of course you should not locally do work on the master branch because that's the JSIG master branch. You should have a different one. I know Drew was mentioning a perfectly fine naming convention, but this is the naming convention we came up with. And in some ways it's really nice in that conceptually it's the master branch in terms of how you think about it, but it's not that master branch to this other master branch. So that's cool. And then we've got these overlays. So beyond having the fork of uPortal itself, we've got overlays on some portlets. So for instance, we're bringing the notifications portlet into our portal for the exciting redesigned portal. And we need to make some changes to that for local needs. The look needs to be a little different, working with the designer. JSPs need to be a little different. So we introduced this layer of abstraction. So there's an overlay over top of the notification portlet as it exists in JSIG. If you go look in that source directory, you'll find a POM, or I guess down the screen a little for you. You find a POM XML that describes, hey, take the JSIG notification portlet, this particular version, and then overlay this stuff on it. And then you get the Wisconsin notifications portal. So that's cool. We have 4 server tiers. So there's the stuff you do locally on your laptop, and then there's pre-dev, test, QA, and production. Each one of those is represented by an overlay in code.doit is our local subversion. So that's in subversion. Oh, I guess I am going to show that. So here's our notification portlet, POM XML, and what's important about this is that it's overlaying on top of a particular version of the JSIG notifications portlet. That's cool. No, that's not what this is showing. Sorry. Let me try that again. So this overlays on top of the JSIG notification portlet. Then I talked about these tiers and what's in subversion and these overlays for the tiers. And now what I meant to say, what I should have said, is what's in those overlays on each tier. So here we are in pre-dev, and we're saying that pre-dev is going to use a particular version of the notification portal. And because pre-dev is a development tier, it's going to go ahead and use a snapshot. So it's going to use the latest and greatest Wisconsin-ized version of the notifications. And that might be different, it is different than what's used in production. Production doesn't have that overlay, and so it doesn't get that portlet at this point because we don't have it. So we come at the other end with overlays on overlays, Maven-driven Maven, as it were. And so Apereo's got a notifications portlet. We have an overlay over that with our special sauce. Each tier has an overlay over that with the tier-specific special sauce, which ideally is just properties files, but could be anything. Could be replacement of XML configuration files or whatever it has to be. The technology is in place to do as much as we need to do in the different tiers. We've got entity files in source control. So that, there's a couple approaches to how you maintain and add data to your portal, how you publish things, how you configure it. But we really like entity files in source control, so that's pretty much controlling. They're separate per tier, so one of the things that's in that overlay, in that set of stuff specific to each tier, is the set of entity files that defines what's in that tier. And this allows us to have different portlet publications, potentially different groups, different stuff in different tiers, and supposingly I don't fat finger the changes to go ahead and move those changes from one tier to another by applying them here. And then, so we have all this Maven and all this stuff in source control, and then we have Jenkins, which is a continuous integration, kind of build automation, build scheduling tool, and we have that running, triggered on commit. So here I am developing along. I really triggered on push. I locally commit my changes. I get to the point where I got something that's good. I push that up, depending on which source control solution it's using. Anyway, the point is, when the changes hit the server, Jenkins detects this either through a webhook or by polling, and it builds the changed thing. And then it knows what depends on the changed thing, so it builds those two. And then it appropriately stages or deploys the resulting changed things. So if we go touch the Madison version of uPortal, the Madison fork of uPortal, the way to read this is bottom to the top, sorry. So what happened here in terms of Jenkins jobs is first we touched our uPortal. That caused predev to go ahead and build because predev is configured to use the bleeding edge, latest and greatest version of our uPortal. And that caused the bigger picture of the overlay and then specifically the uPortal that's deployed in that tier to build and deploy. So that's good. So we got lots and lots and lots of Jenkins jobs configured up for the different tiers and different portlets, and they all have interdependencies in the appropriate tree-like way so that the right thing happens when you do things. We can chat with Jenkins via our group chat room, which is kind of cute. You can reward it for doing the right thing. You can also ask it, what's pending in the build queue. So right there in that same context where we're chatting among ourselves about the work we're doing, we can interrogate Jenkins. But we don't really need to because there's an iMac kind of mounted to the wall in a corner showing, among other things, the Jenkins wallboard, which tells you the status of the most recent jobs that it ran. So when you screw up, then this thing turns red, and it even says you screwed up, which is a questionable new feature in the latest version of that. What else we got? So, and then there's Nexus. Sonatype Nexus is a technology, a server, a thing for running your own Maven repository. So part of the output of all these Jenkins jobs is to result in Maven artifacts that then other jobs and other tiers can depend upon. And so those need to live somewhere. And they don't live in Central because they're specific to our implementation. And so they live in our own Nexus repository. The sane and healthy way to manage that is with Sonatype Nexus. And if you go with the professional thing, you get support and upgrades from them, which would be it's also an institutional cache of Central, so that not everything needs to download the entire internet from the internet all the time, which is what Maven mainly does. This is essential to this strategy of a Maven-driven Maven strategy where there's Maven all over the place. you have to be able to manage your Maven repository, and so you end up with Nexus. It is not okay to just shove artifacts in Subversion or something and think that's going to work. I'll pause for breath. So that was a recap / restatement of last year's presentation about Maven-driven, Jenkins-driven Maven, where we committed change to source control, and that source control has a bunch of Maven builds configured, and that triggers Jenkins to go ahead and build the things that are changed as a result of that commit, and even to deploy it to tiers that are dynamic. So it's not going to shove it directly into production. We have a window Tuesday morning to update production when that happens. QA updates nightly, but then the development tiers are more dynamic. All right. So that was a bunch of technical processes and practices, and it's certainly something I think any of us would be happy to talk about lots and lots more, because it's complex stuff, but it's pretty cool. Let's talk about some processes and practices that are more about people and communication and less about technology. Let's talk about Scrum. So Scrum is a specific, yes?
Sorry, before we leave that Maven stuff.
Yeah.
With overlays in particular, one of the things that I've seen happen is that we end up running afoul of upstream changes in a file that's present in the overlay and present in the upstream branch that you're tracking. And we've seen it happen enough in my particular environment that we've really moved strongly away from overlay. So I was curious if A, you run into those problems, B, if so, did you apply any tooling to fix the problem, or it's just human diligence?
It's mostly human diligence. It's a real problem. I don't know how to do it better. So overlays are adding value in our environment by giving us the opportunity to change things at each tier, both in our consumption of the open source software in the case where we're overlaying on something out of Apereo, and then in each tier we configure it. One alternative for some of what we're doing with overlays is Maven filter files. Those scare me for different reasons. Environment-specific filter files, and those scare me for other reasons. But no, it's just a matter of human diligence, and also the overlay lets us declare what version of the thing we're pulling in. So when you go bump the version, you got to go look at what changed that you're between the versions that you're overlaying. It's a manual pain in the butt. All right, let's talk about Scrum. We do Scrum. It's a specific agile method. We have two product owners, one of whom is represented in this room. Thank you, Jim. We have 3-ish Scrum team members. We have Tim Levitt, Tim Verteen, and me. We have a student employee who's turning out to be fantastic. And we have a web developer we hope to come on board in 5 or 6 weeks, or whatever that's happening. So the team will maybe grow a little bit. We do 2-week iterations. So Scrum means that you have a product backlog. You have this infinite queue, prioritized, lovingly groomed by your product owner of what is the most important things to be doing. And then it's lovingly groomed by the Scrum team to estimate how hard these things are. It turns out there's been some prioritization lately, so the top things are not so much groomed in this screenshot, but that's not the point. The point is we have this, 530 issues is practically infinite. So it's basically an infinite queue of good stuff we can do, and it needs prioritized to pick out what we can do. We slurp in stuff to these 2-week sprints, and we work the sprints. So during a sprint, things flow from to do to in progress to done. If we run into some issue, yes? Oh, sure, this is Jira. So Jira is, in some sense, this terribly complicated issue tracking And the way to fall in love with it, I think it's totally wonderful, is to genuinely do Scrum and take advantage of the Jira Agile features, and then it kind of pays for itself.
All of the main others and trying to do some sort of agile stuff. Do this, I'm using index cards right now, in that way. I was just wondering what you guys were.
Some of my fondest memories are the summer that I used index cards with Susan Bramhall at Yale working on their portal. So at that scale, as long as that's working for you, it seems fantastic. Hold that question and maybe we can talk about it again after, but we'll mention a couple things relevant to that. Something to struggle with in your Scrum is the definition of done. You know, how done does it need to be to get to the end? Does it mean that it's refactored? Does it mean that it has tests? Does it mean that it performs? Does it mean that you've followed through on merging it up into Apereo code that you touched? Does it mean that you responded to the feedback that you got when you went and tried to? Anyway, this is hard, right? This is hard to figure out how done does it need to be before it's done, and I think it's fair to say that it's a continual source of inspect and adapt. There's my rant on the definition of done. Anyway. Incidentally, as an aside, I personally got my certified Scrummaster training from this gentleman. I thought he was absolutely fantastic through CollabNet. So if you think, hey, that Scrum is worth more than 5 minutes in a presentation and I'd like to actually learn about it, A, there's infinite stuff to learn about on the internet, and B, you can get training. And I thought he was good. Let's talk about stuff that's not Scrum, sort of, though. So we developed the stuff, and it's done. And it turns out the definition of done for us is that it went up on a test server so that we can demo it at the sprint demo at the end of the sprint, which you would know about if you learned all about Scrum, but I don't have time to tell you about Scrum. So we'll just stipulate that there's a review at the end of the sprint where we show off our stuff, and done mostly means we get to show it off, you know, on a test server at the end of the sprint. That sounds pretty good. But it doesn't do anybody any good to have this cool stuff hanging out on a test server. It needs to migrate up to production. And so when things go off the end of the Scrum board where they're done, they go on to the migration board where they migrate across from test to tested to so forth, all the way up, ideally, to production. But of course, the rule of crossing the road applies. The point of these different tiers is to be open to discovering that there's something wrong and not just press forward. Anyway. So this was before this morning's production roll. It's Tuesday. We get to push updates to production. It's very exciting. And so after this morning's production roll, that thing that was staged for QA is actually in QA because Jenkins put it there. And that thing that was staged for production is actually in production because Jenkins put it there. That's pretty cool. Scrum. So Scrum, the short version on Scrum. Scrum works great for a dedicated team, for a team that is empowered to say no to everything else and empowered to focus on doing the things they committed to do for this sprint over and over. It's fantastic. Most of your employees in your organization are not, in fact, part of your Scrum team because their full job is not working on your portal. And Scrum ain't going to work for resources that are not dedicated to the project. And so we do Kanban-like things for that. We have server administration, where it's to do, in progress, done. You can still prioritize, so you still get a lot of the advantage of Agile, but you're not deceiving yourself about, I estimated these, and I pulled these in the sprint, and they're going to be, it doesn't work that way. All you have is prioritization and status, and yet this allows our team, the core team working on the portal, to communicate effectively with others working on the bigger picture of the project. So this is how we interact with systems administration consultants, or whatever the right job title is. Likewise with our designer, here we're using a Trello board, which is a partial answer to the, hey, I really like index cards, and that's working, but I wish it was digital. Go take a look at Trello. And we're using that to organize conversations with our user experience consultant, who comes and sits with us regularly, and we can queue up, you know, what it is we'd like to discuss and what is come of those discussions. And it doesn't have to be in Jira because they're not really things that are like code that get deployed with the project. So, Kanban for working with people beyond your team. Scrum for working with people within your team. What about working beyond the university, beyond our immediate team with the larger Apereo picture? Well, there's an IRC chat channel that we like to hang out in. That's cool. It's even logged again now, so if you can't handle watching it in real time, and I'll tell you, I really can, at least there's log files you can go look at. We still do have email lists, and we like email lists, and so we post the email list. But hey, we're working on this favorites portlet. Hey, we made some progress on the favorites portlet. Hey, anybody got feedback on this favorites portlet? It's pretty cool. You even get some feedback. We've got this relationship between our portal and the JSig portal product, and it's a fork. And we really try to code things in the right places and merge them. And even with Git magic, this is a little bit of manual work, kind of a pain in the butt. And where do these pull requests go? Do they go on our code base so we can leave them locally? That's fine, but our fork is private. You all can't see that, so you can't provide feedback on that. And so then what, is it just a code dump into the public repo, or do we have another pull request there? These are processes still to be figured out, I think, but figuring them out. I think it works a little better when repos are public, since it's a little more transparent. So we have environment-specific overlays that are, of course, private. They're environment-specific. They're kind of none of your business. But that notifications portlet overlay, for instance, is entirely public. And so the tweaks that we've made to the JSTD pages are available. And maybe they're good, and maybe we should get around to pushing them upstream into the notifications portlet. Or maybe you like them, in which case I can say my favorite thing in the whole world, which is, okay, they're public, they're right there, you cherry pick them. That works pretty well. It makes discovery and collaboration better. We use Unicon support, so Unicon's open source support for uPortal. We subscribe, and so lately we've used it things for things like validation of that config mode permissions issue fix, getting some advice about avoiding layout corruption. If you do it just wrong, this thing we're doing where we very regularly re-import entities is dangerous, and you're going to result in a mismatch of IDs, and you're going to be very, very unhappy. So you want to avoid that. There was another bug they nailed, much appreciated. And we've been, continually inspecting and adapting our process. So recently it's been things like, how do we know when we're ready to merge a pull request? Because sitting around waiting for people to merge a pull request is really boring. You'd like your pull request to be merged so you can move on to the next thing. So kind of clarifying the rules of engagement on that. As you work on a thing, you come up with great ideas. Sometimes there's bugs, sometimes there's features, so you're adding stories. I can be particularly annoying in adding lots of stories, I know. And we needed to kind of separate where are these stories coming from and have they been groomed yet. Came up with a really quite workable idea of new stories go into a special Jira project and get groomed by our esteemed product owner before they hit the kind of general product backlog. So continually inspect and adapt. We're spinning up some kind of effort to have a style development guide for portlets. That's not much there yet, but I think there will be stuff there, and it's gaining some momentum. And I think we have some ideas we're kicking around to continue to reduce friction and improve the process, right? In terms of engineering the uPortal build and our build to try to reduce some of the duplication of work and having to merge things back. Really looking forward to another member joining our team, a web developer, and that also kind of makes the team think about what can we do to help that onboarding process and make a web developer more productive. And I'll tell you, the most productive way for a web developer to engage is not to go learn Spring Web MVC and the portlet spec, and oh my gosh, come on. And so we've got to figure out how to do something, whether it's capturing HTML snapshots or evolving toward natural templates or something to better meet that kind of modern development tool set where it's at. So take home points. Automate everything. You should have process. You should be mindful of your process. Frantic email is not a process. So at least capture the issues to index cards or something. Take advantage of the opportunities that Apereo provides, that open source communities provide, and inspect and adapt, because whatever processes you have, they can be better. Processes matter. They matter in terms of setting the default of who you're going to interact with and how and in what order. They matter in terms of how easy it is to share your code and how easy it is for other people to understand what you're doing. They matter in terms of having an effect on what you prioritize and what you actually take to completion. And good process feels really good. Bad process can really feel terrible. So this stuff's important, but it's not too important. We should continue to remember what's really important. Getting there's half the fun, especially when you're mindful about it. But the there, that's fun too, and it's really about delivering a user-centric, well-designed, good experience for the users of our portal. So I hope this talk can set up an opportunity for further discussion. That was a crazy whirlwind tour, very difficult to consume, I appreciate, of some, certainly not all, some of the processes and practices going on in our portal. And so I think from that, we'd be able to discuss that more. You'll be able to share what processes you have. I'd love to have those conversations. And I'd be especially interested in how can we collaborate and share efficient processes better. How can we improve the process in Apereo and in the uPortal project. I think I have 3 formal minutes and then 15 informal minutes for questions and discussion, and the whole rest of the conference, and the email lists, and the IRC chat, and the everything for further discussion beyond that. Thank you for letting me drone on all this time. Questions, comments, discussion while we have the room? Yes.
This might be better for a separate conversation, but could you, when you were talking about the overlays and how you laid out the overlays for the different tiers,
yes,
could you talk a little bit about how you set that up? Because that's not something I'm familiar with. We just have a single overlay. So
yeah,
we have the filters file for the individual environments, but I'm kind of interested in what you did there.
To be clear, I didn't do it.
Well,
more talented people
what
than
you as University of the Royal.
Yes. How would I hear this display? Anyway, I'll just talk about it. After we can look at the overlays if you want. We can really get into exactly what's in POM XML. But so the way this is set up is. So we don't overlay on the uPortal here. We grab the uPortal WAR, the uPortal web application itself, and then we somewhat painstakingly reproduce what the uPortal ear process is doing, except with our own controlled versions of all the portlets that we've drawn in. So I think that's one insight into how this works. But fundamentally what's going on here is there are 2 things going on. There are Maven processes that result in dependable artifacts that build products. So for instance, the University of Wisconsin version of the notifications portlet is a product. It has a Wisconsin group code, and it has an artifact code, and it gets published up into our Nexus controlled Maven repository. So I go edit code into our notifications portlet overlay, I hit go, the result of that, supposing it's a release, is to release that into our Maven repository. So that's one flavor of thing, to produce product. The other flavor of thing we have going on is Maven builds to build environments. So we have these overlays for an environment. So the pre-dev overlay says, I want the snapshot version of the notifications portlet, and I want the snapshot version of bookmarks, and I want all these different things, and that's what I am. And I have these entities, and I have these properties files, and I have this configuration. And then there's a copy of that. It's not a branch, it has no formal relationship, it's just another thing like that that's the overlay for the QA tier. And it likewise declares what stuff it depends on, what portlets it's going to draw in, and it declares what data it has, what entities it has.
So a lot of it is a matter of scripting, as far as your process, your build process.
Most of the magic is happening in Maven. So it's mostly a matter of writing pom.xml files that say, here's what I'm building, and here's how you build it, and here's all the stuff it depends on, and the Maven thing, right? The thing you declare in the pom.xml. And then we just have a lot of them, and we have relationships between them. That's most of the magic. There's very little magic, but more than zero magic in Perl scripts and shell scripts. Mesa, I think you had a question?
Two, actually. So have you found a way to automate the release of a portlet into a pre-dev environment, other than just going to a pom.xml file and updating snapshot 1 to snapshot 2?
I can answer that if you want.
Great, that would be great. You want to do it up here so it's on the mic?
So you asked about how we can automate a portlet release to a test environment.
Yep.
So we do that now. So when you update a thing, it actually will automatically go and build. We have our Jenkins scripts. You push to a branch, it'll automatically go build a snapshot. But after that, you still have to go and update the pom.xml. But I suppose it's probably pretty easy to just go check another trigger there and then update pom.xml afterwards. So it doesn't sound too bad.
It would have been, or it could be really sweet if you could dynamically pick pom.xml files per environment, so that when you, let's say, if you make a change to the notifications portlet, you overlay for the pre-dev environment automatically knows somehow that it would, because that would be your ultimate objective, right? You want to see that portlet.
Sort of, and we don't have to, right? Because so pre-dev. Let's just stipulate that that's true. That's not true. So we have a pre-dev environment and a test environment, but I'm going to pretend they're one thing. So the test tier takes snapshots. And so by committing a change to our notifications portlet, that will cause that notification portlet to build, and then Jenkins knows that a consequence of building that portlet is I need to rebuild and deploy pre-dev. And without changing the pom.xml, it already says I'm going to take the snapshot, so it's going to get the snapshot.
Okay.
So there's two flavors of things, right? There's snapshots where things are crazy and dynamic, and it's okay if they break. And then there's like versioned releases. And so it's okay somewhat that there are manual steps in causing a versioned release change in QA and production, because that is supposed to be a manual, deliberate step where Andrew, is very careful about what change he's making and doesn't fat finger. And it's kind of sort of a big deal to decide that we're moving. So recently, our request I processed was to bump to the next version of the course guide, I think it was, in production. Well, and the answer to that is no. First, we're going to do it in QA. Someone's going to test it, right? And so there's a certain amount of deliberately manual process there to bump that, be deliberate about what versioned release of these artifacts are we using in the environments that we care about.
We kind of have a similar setup, and we have like a rule that we say to all developers: if you do a release, then always produce your next snapshot immediately after doing the release.
Yes.
And then as we migrate to the environment, we change the test tier to be the next snapshot, knowing that it's going to be there as the developers do as well.
Absolutely. The Maven release plugin, by the way, automates the stuff you have to do to your local pom.xml, because that's a pain in the butt. But it doesn't automate reaching out the POMs that depend on that and updating them, because you're kind of making a human decision about that you're doing that on purpose. Thank you very much. I hope we can all discuss more processes for uPortal, and I especially hope that maybe we can discuss a little bit ideas to reduce friction and make the local, at least technical process require less local change and merging and that stuff. That would be healthy.